Imagine opening your doors, giving your home, your heart, and your support, only to be repaid with insults. They lived under my roof, ate at my table, enjoyed my kindness, and still had the audacity to call me and my child freeloaders. But what they forgot was whose name was on the deed. And this is where my story begins. Sacrifice turned into betrayal is a bitter reality many of us experience when we give more than we should, expecting at least gratitude in return. When I opened my home to my parents, I didn't do it out of obligation or necessity. I did it because I believed in family, in the bond that should keep us together, in the idea that support is what defines love. They needed help, and I had the ability to provide it. I told myself that sharing my roof with them would be an act of kindness, a chance to repay everything they had once done for me. For years, I had carried the memory of their sacrifices when I was younger, the lessons they instilled in me, the discipline, the guidance, and I wanted to honor that. But what I never anticipated was how quickly that sacrifice would be twisted, how easily it would be ignored, and how effortlessly it would be thrown back in my face. I worked tirelessly to maintain that house, to keep the bills paid, to ensure that my child and I had stability. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't handed to me. Every paycheck, every late night at work, every tough choice about what to spend and what to save, that was my foundation. And into that foundation, I welcomed them. I thought that my sacrifice would be recognized, that they would see the effort I put into giving them comfort when they had none. Instead, my willingness to help became a weapon used against me. My sacrifice became invisible the moment they decided to paint me as weak, dependent, or unworthy. It began with small things, comments here and there that I brushed off. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were frustrated with their own situation. I excused it because I believed that deep down, they appreciated what I was doing. But then the comments grew sharper, heavier, cutting deeper each time. It was no longer about them being uncomfortable or stressed. It became about me and my child, about how we supposedly leaned on them, about how we didn't contribute, as though the very roof over their heads wasn't mine, as though the meals they ate didn't come from my table, as though the electricity that kept them warm didn't come from the bills I paid. This betrayal doesn't come just from words. It comes from the way they looked at me, with disdain, as if my kindness was weakness. It comes from the way they talked about me to others, shifting blame, painting themselves as victims while they enjoyed the safety I provided. I remember standing there, listening to them scream in my face, calling me and my child freeloaders, and all I could think was how twisted it had become. My sacrifice, which should have been acknowledged with at least respect if not gratitude, had been turned into ammunition for them to degrade me. And it hurts, more than most betrayals, because it comes from the people who should know you best. Strangers can mock you, enemies can insult you, but when your own family, your parents, the people you once trusted above everyone else, choose to strip away your dignity in your own home, the wound goes deeper than anything else. It is not just a betrayal of kindness, it is a betrayal of the bond that should never be broken. Sacrifice is never meant to be easy. You give, you stretch yourself thin, you make choices that sometimes leave you struggling because you believe that in the end, it matters. You believe that doing good will come back to you, that family will remember the nights you went without so they could have, the mornings you woke up early so they could rest, the long hours you endured just so the bills could be covered. But when that sacrifice is repaid with accusations, when instead of recognition you are met with insults, it becomes a bitter pill to swallow. It is not just about money or shelter. It is about trust. It is about knowing that you gave a part of yourself and, instead of treasuring it, they trampled over it as though it meant nothing. It is about realizing that your love and your sacrifice were not valued but exploited. They lived comfortably in a place they didn't have to pay for, a place they didn't have to maintain, and instead of seeing the gift, they chose to bite the hand that fed them. Sacrifice turned into betrayal leaves a scar that never quite fades. It teaches you to question your own generosity, to wonder if kindness is worth it, to doubt whether the bonds you thought were unbreakable are anything more than illusions. It changes the way you see people, especially those closest to you, because you learn the hard way that sometimes the ones you expect gratitude from are the ones who will hurt you the most. Living rent-free yet ungrateful is a contradiction that cuts deeper than most insults. When you offer someone a roof over their head, you expect at least a hint of appreciation, even if circumstances are difficult, even if pride sometimes gets in the way. But what I witnessed was the complete opposite of gratitude. They lived in my house, walked through the doors I had worked so hard to keep open, enjoyed the food I put on the table, the light I paid to keep shining, the warmth of the home I built for my child, and yet not once did they pause to acknowledge what they were receiving. Instead of appreciation, what I received was arrogance, entitlement, and eventually, open hostility. The strangest part of it all was how quickly they adjusted to the comfort I provided. In the beginning, there was a thin layer of politeness, a surface-level acknowledgement that I had taken them in. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, that acknowledgement faded into nothingness. They began to behave as though the house was theirs, as though the sacrifices that went into maintaining it had no connection to me. The bills I paid became invisible, the groceries I carried through the door were taken for granted, and the effort I made to ensure everyone had stability turned into something they acted like they were owed. It's a strange feeling to watch people take and take until they no longer even see that they are taking. They treated my labor as if it were some endless well of resources, something that just existed for them to use. Every paycheck I earned went into keeping that household running, and yet instead of gratitude, I was met with sharp words and accusations. The more I gave, the less they valued it. It was as if every act of support erased itself in their eyes the moment it was done. Nothing was enough, nothing was respected, and nothing was remembered. The ungratefulness showed itself in small daily moments. Plates left dirty with the expectation I would handle them. Lights left on all night because, after all, I was the one paying the bill. Complaints about meals that were cooked, as if the food that appeared on the table wasn't bought with money I had worked hard to earn. They criticized, they demanded, they sighed with dissatisfaction at the very things they should have cherished. Gratitude would have cost them nothing, not a dime, not a sacrifice, only a few words, a little respect, but even that seemed too much for them to offer. What made it worse was their sense of entitlement. It wasn't just the absence of gratitude, it was the presence of expectation. They behaved as if they deserved everything I was providing, as if it was their right to live comfortably in my home without lifting a finger to contribute. I had welcomed them out of love, but they transformed that act of kindness into a responsibility I supposedly owed them. Their ungratefulness was not passive, it was active, almost weaponized. They didn't just fail to thank me, they made me feel like I wasn't doing enough, like my efforts were never sufficient, like somehow I was still falling short even though they gave nothing in return. There is a particular sting in ungratefulness when it comes from family. From strangers, it can be dismissed, brushed off, forgotten. But when your own parents, the people who raised you, the ones you once admired, cannot find it in themselves to show even the smallest acknowledgement of your sacrifice, it leaves you questioning everything. You begin to wonder if love means the same to them as it does to you. You ask yourself if they truly see you as a person, or simply as a provider, a tool, a resource to be drained until nothing is left. The silence of ungratefulness is loud. It echoes in every chore left undone, every bill dismissed as irrelevant, every sneer when you say you're tired, every complaint when you set boundaries. It weighs heavier than words because it is constant. It is in the way they never asked how my day was, never asked how I was holding up, never once acknowledged the pressure of carrying the entire household on my shoulders. It is in the way they dismissed my child's needs, as if what mattered most was their own comfort, their own convenience, their own pride. Living rent-free should have been a reminder to them that they were being cared for, that someone was willing to stand by them when they had nowhere else to go. Instead, it became an illusion in their minds that they were owed everything. They had convinced themselves that their presence alone was contribution enough, that their very existence excused them from responsibility. The more they took, the more entitled they became, until the gratitude that should have been natural was replaced entirely by resentment toward me. Ungratefulness has a way of stripping the dignity from both sides. It leaves the giver feeling unseen, undervalued, and disrespected, while the receiver becomes blind to their own dependence. It transforms generosity into a battlefield where kindness is no longer kindness, but fuel for criticism. It makes every effort feel wasted, every gesture feel ignored, every sacrifice feel foolish. To live with people who benefit from your labor but refuse to acknowledge it is to live in a constant shadow of betrayal. Humiliation in my own home is a wound that goes deeper than almost anything else. A house is supposed to be a place of safety, the one space where you can breathe without judgment, where you can find peace after the world outside has already battered you down. But when the very people you open your doors to decide to turn that sanctuary into a place of ridicule, the betrayal is sharper than any insult a stranger could throw at you. The walls I had worked so hard to build, the home I had created with love for myself and for my child, became a stage where my dignity was stripped away piece by piece, not by outsiders, but by the very parents I had allowed in. There were days when the atmosphere in that house felt heavy, suffocating, not because of bills or stress or routine, but because of the constant fear of being mocked in my own space. They didn't just criticize quietly or in private, they raised their voices, making sure I heard every insult, making sure my child heard every degrading word. They turned arguments into performances, shouting about how I wasn't enough, how I wasn't capable, how I wasn't worthy, while standing in the kitchen I stocked with groceries, while sitting on the furniture I bought, while sleeping under the roof I worked day and night to maintain. Their words weren't just accusations. They were weapons, designed to cut deeper because they knew I couldn't escape them in the place that was supposed to be mine. I remember moments when I would be preparing a meal, doing something as simple as setting food on the table, only to be met with sneers and comments that twisted my efforts into something laughable. Instead of gratitude for the food, I was mocked for what I cooked, for how I managed the household, for every little choice I made. My child, sitting there quietly, absorbing it all, had to watch as their parent was belittled in the very home where they were supposed to feel proud and secure. The humiliation wasn't mine alone, it spilled over into my child's heart, teaching them that even kindness could be twisted into shame by those too blinded by arrogance to see what was in front of them. What stings the most about humiliation at home is the lack of refuge. Outside, you can defend yourself, you can walk away, you can escape the people who try to demean you. But inside your own walls, where do you go? When the insults echo through the halls, when the raised voices carry into every room, when the people who should protect you are the ones tearing you down, there is no corner to hide in. Every room becomes a reminder that you are trapped in a cycle of ridicule you didn't deserve. The house you once called home transforms into a prison where humiliation is the daily routine. They didn't just humiliate me with words, they did it with their actions too. Taking over the living room as if it were theirs, pushing their opinions into every decision, dismissing my authority in front of my child, as though I had no right to be in control of my own household. They took pleasure in undermining me, in reminding me at every turn that they believed I wasn't capable of standing on my own, even as I was the one carrying them. The cruelty wasn't in one moment or one argument. It was in the slow, relentless chipping away of my confidence every single day. The humiliation grew heavier each time they chose to raise their voices in front of neighbors or visitors. Instead of keeping disagreements private, they aired them loudly, ensuring that others could hear their accusations. They wanted the world to see me as weak, dependent, and unworthy, forgetting that without me, they wouldn't even have had a place to stand and shout. They stood in my house, their voices shaking the walls, declaring me and my child freeloaders, and in that moment, the humiliation was complete. To be degraded in your own sanctuary, in front of your child, and possibly in earshot of strangers, is a kind of pain that burns into your memory and refuses to fade. It is a strange kind of cruelty when the very people who rely on you the most are the ones who try the hardest to strip you of your dignity. They knew my weaknesses, they knew my fears, and they used them against me, confident that I wouldn't fight back because I loved them, because I respected them, because I had been raised to honor them no matter what. But humiliation has a way of turning that respect into ashes. Every insult they hurled didn't just attack me in the moment. It rewrote the way I saw my relationship with them. It made me question the foundation of trust one had once believed was unshakable. To endure humiliation in your own home is to live in constant tension. Every morning, I woke up wondering what insult would come that day. Every night, I lay awake replaying their words, wondering how I could still be standing after so much was taken from me. It wasn't just about pride, it was about survival. My home was no longer a place of rest, but a battlefield where my worth was attacked again and again, leaving scars that no apology could erase. Silent strength over loud insults is not something that comes naturally. It is something you are forced to learn when every word thrown at you is designed to break you. In that house, where voices were raised against me, where accusations echoed off the walls, I discovered that silence could be more powerful than screaming back. Every insult, every harsh word, every accusation of being a burden was meant to provoke me, to drag me down to their level, to make me lash out so they could point and say, "See, you're the problem." But instead of shouting, I chose silence. Instead of collapsing under the weight of their cruelty, I stood tall in the quiet strength that they mistook for weakness. They thought that if they yelled loud enough, their words would become truth. They thought that if they humiliated me often enough, I would lose sight of who I really was. They underestimated me. They believed that silence was surrender, but what they didn't see was that every quiet moment was me gathering strength, me refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. My silence was not weakness, it was control. It was the shield I held against their storm, the barrier that kept me from losing myself in the chaos they created. There were nights when I sat alone, their words still ringing in my ears, and I wanted nothing more than to scream back, to defend myself, to remind them of every sacrifice I had made. I wanted to shout about the bills I paid, the food I cooked, the roof I maintained, the life I provided for them when they had nowhere else to go. But I held it back because shouting would have given them exactly what they wanted. They wanted me flustered, defensive, scrambling to prove my worth to people who already decided to deny it. My silence denied them that victory. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like standing there, taking the blows, and refusing to bend. Sometimes it looks like walking away from an argument not because you can't fight, but because you know the fight isn't worth the energy. Sometimes it is letting them exhaust themselves with their accusations while you remain unshaken. That silence unnerved them more than any words ever could. They expected tears, shouting, or desperation. Instead, they were met with calm eyes, a still posture, and a quiet that spoke louder than their insults. My child saw that silence too. They saw me endure what no one should have to endure, and they saw me choose dignity over rage. I knew that every insult I allowed to pass without retaliation was not just for me, but for my child's eyes watching closely. I wanted them to learn that strength is not about who shouts the loudest, but about who stands firm when everyone else tries to knock them down. I wanted them to see that insults lose their power when you refuse to let them define you. There is power in refusing to engage. Every time they called me a freeloader, every time they mocked me in my own house, I could have responded with anger, but I chose silence. That silence became my strategy. It gave me space to think, to plan, to prepare for the day when I would no longer have to live under the shadow of their cruelty. It kept me focused on what mattered, my child, my work, my future, instead of being consumed by their noise. Their voices were loud, but my silence was steady, and steady always outlasts loud. They mistook my silence for weakness, but in reality, it was resilience. Loud people believe that raising their voice makes them right, but I knew the truth. I knew that their volume was just a cover for their own insecurity, their own failures, their own inability to face the reality that they were the ones freeloading. My silence was my way of holding up a mirror to them, showing them that their words had no real power over me, that their insults only revealed their own bitterness. It wasn't easy. Every day was a test, every insult a temptation to break the silence and defend myself. But I reminded myself that their opinion didn't change the truth. My silence was me protecting my energy, me refusing to pour myself into arguments that would never end. My silence was me standing on the higher ground, no matter how hard they tried to drag me down into the mud. Silent strength is not about ignoring pain. It is about carrying it without letting it crush you. It is about understanding that you don't need to explain your worth to people who are determined not to see it. It is about knowing that your actions, the roof you provide, the meals you cook, the bills you pay, the love you give speak louder than their insults ever will. Silence, in those moments, became my revenge. It showed them that they could scream, humiliate, and accuse, but they could not break me. Tables turned with truth revealed is the moment every quiet sacrifice and every silent endurance leads to. For so long, they lived in the illusion that their words had power, that their voices carried more weight than my reality, that their insults could somehow rewrite the truth of who was truly holding everything together. They convinced themselves that their accusations of freeloading, their humiliations, and their endless arrogance had buried me under shame. But the truth has a way of rising no matter how much noise tries to cover it. And when it finally surfaced, the very foundation they had built their pride upon began to crumble. For months, they acted as if the house belonged to them, as if their presence gave them authority, as if my child and I were intruders in our own space. They strutted around as though the lights stayed on because of their efforts, as though the meals appeared on the table because of their contribution, as though they were the reason the roof stood over all of our heads. They had gotten so comfortable in their entitlement that they forgot the undeniable fact: none of it existed without me. Every brick of that house, every bill that was paid, every piece of furniture they used was there because I made it possible. They had rewritten the narrative so loudly that they even started to believe it themselves, until the day came when the undeniable truth had to be laid bare. The truth revealed itself in the simplest of ways: a reminder of ownership, a glance at paperwork, the hard evidence that all of it was mine. My name was on the deed. My name was on the bills. My name was on every document that kept that house standing. And in that moment, the volume of their insults no longer mattered. They could scream freeloader as loud as they wanted, but the truth was in black and white, signed and sealed. The tables turned not because I shouted louder, but because reality stood stronger than their illusions. What made the shift so powerful was not just the revelation of facts, but the weight of realization crashing down on them. All those times they called me weak, dependent, unworthy, each of those accusations shattered against the truth that they were the ones living rent-free, that they were the ones depending entirely on me, that they were the ones taking and taking without giving anything back. The insult they threw at me reflected back on them with double the force, and they could no longer hide behind their arrogance. The tables had turned, and suddenly the mirror showed them exactly who they were. There was silence in that moment, a silence more deafening than any of their shouting. It was the silence of recognition, the silence of shame beginning to creep in where pride once stood. They had to face the reality that every cruel word they had spoken had been a lie, and not just a lie, but a projection of their own guilt. The truth stripped away their power. No matter how hard they tried to cover it up, no matter how long they tried to rewrite the story, the facts stood firm. I was the provider, the caretaker, the one who carried the weight of that household. They were the dependents. They were the freeloaders. The tables turning did not require me to humiliate them back or scream in their faces. It only required patience. I let them build their tower of pride higher and higher, and when the truth was revealed, it toppled under its own weight. They had underestimated me, mistaking my silence for weakness, mistaking my endurance for submission. But all along I knew that the truth would come, and when it did, their words would mean nothing. The power of truth is that it cannot be twisted forever. Lies may sting in the moment, insults may hurt when they are loud, but when truth finally steps into the light, it erases every false claim. That moment became my quiet revenge. I didn't need to raise my voice, I didn't need to match their cruelty, I didn't need to tear them down. All I needed to do was stand beside the truth, and the truth did the work for me. What they once used to humiliate me became the very weapon that undid them. They wanted to label me as a burden, but the truth showed them who the real burdens were. They wanted to call me weak, but the truth showed them who had carried everything all along. They wanted to pretend I owed them, but the truth showed them that without me, they would have had nothing. The tables turned, and with it, the entire balance of power shifted. And in that shift, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Not because they stopped talking, not because they suddenly transformed into grateful people, but because I no longer needed their acknowledgement. The truth was enough. Their insults had no more power, their humiliation no longer stung, their arrogance no longer shook me. The tables had turned, and the truth had spoken louder than they ever could. Revenge through dignity, not destruction, is the choice that separates strength from weakness. When people push you to the edge, when they insult you, humiliate you, and drain you, the easiest reaction is to strike back with the same cruelty they showed you. But there is no greater revenge than refusing to become like them. They screamed in my face. They labeled me and my child as freeloaders. They made my own home feel like a place of shame rather than comfort. Yet I chose to rise in a way they never expected. I chose to hold on to my dignity, because dignity is a form of revenge that leaves scars they cannot heal from. Every insult they hurled at me was an invitation to fight dirty. They wanted me to lower myself to their level, to match their shouting with my own, to engage in battles where no one wins. But I knew that destruction would not restore my pride. Revenge is not always about burning everything down. Sometimes it is about walking away with your head held high while they collapse under the weight of their own behavior. And that is exactly what I did. I refused to give them the victory of seeing me lose control. I refused to let them say, "Look, you're just as bad as we are." Instead, I let my dignity speak louder than any words I could have thrown back at them. Dignity in the face of betrayal is not easy. It means swallowing the urge to lash out. It means controlling the fire inside when all you want is to unleash it. But it also means remembering who you are and why their insults do not define you. Dignity is revenge because it shows them that no matter how much they tried to break you, they couldn't. They used their words like weapons, and still, I stood strong. They tried to drag me down into shame, but I walked away taller. That is the kind of revenge that lingers, because it forces them to confront the fact that their cruelty never succeeded. The greatest humiliation for people who thrive on tearing others down is to realize they never had the power to destroy you. They screamed, but I didn't shatter. They insulted, but I didn't bow. They tried to paint me as weak, but my quiet resilience proved stronger than their loudest accusations. They will remember my silence more than they will ever remember their own shouting, because silence mixed with dignity is unforgettable. It is haunting. It is the one response they cannot fight against, because you give them nothing to twist, nothing to use, nothing to control. Revenge through dignity also means letting the truth reveal itself without staining it with anger. They lived rent-free. They depended on me, and everyone around us could see it. I didn't have to announce it, I didn't have to rub it in their faces, I didn't have to scream it back at them. The facts spoke for themselves, and my calmness made those facts even louder. People may forget heated arguments, but they never forget when one side keeps their composure while the other side loses all control. That contrast becomes the lasting memory, and in that contrast lies my victory. There were moments when I imagined what destruction would look like, when I thought about throwing them out without a word, cutting ties with finality, or exposing their hypocrisy to everyone who knew them. But then I realized that destruction fades. It gives a momentary sense of power, but it also leaves you empty afterward. Dignity, however, lasts forever. It builds a legacy, especially for my child who is watching everything unfold. I wanted my child to see that revenge doesn't always come in the form of anger. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is showing restraint, holding your ground, and proving that you are stronger because you did not let cruelty turn you cruel. Choosing dignity also meant choosing myself. For too long, I had allowed their voices to dominate the space, their opinions to cloud my peace, their insults to weigh on my shoulders. But dignity gave me the courage to say enough. It allowed me to reclaim my home not by destroying them, but by refusing to let them define me. My dignity reminded me that I was the one in control, not them. I didn't need to scream to prove it. My strength was already in the way I carried myself despite their attempts to drag me down. In the end, dignity becomes the ultimate revenge because it leaves them with nothing. Nothing to twist, nothing to fuel their anger, nothing to use against you. They are left with their own bitterness, their own shame, their own realization that they failed to break you. That is the kind of revenge that lingers far longer than any insult ever could, because they will replay those moments in their minds and know that their cruelty did not define the outcome. My dignity did.